All About Writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 29, part 5 of our series on writing craft. I'm Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher.
And I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning best-selling author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter. And today, we're talking about character creation. This is really important, both Sara and I, because all of our books are character-focused, and they're really important to us. But when you're going to create a character, where do you start? How do you go into this? What inspiration do you use? These are some of the questions we're going to explore today. So, I'm going to jump in with a first thought. There's lots of different ways to approach character creation, but here's one that I think is important to consider, and that is, what does your story need? So as you start thinking about who's going to populate your story, think about what kind of story you're telling. Like, for your main character, do you want them to be happy, or sad, or angry? Do you want a strong character, or do you want a weak character? Think about where your story's set. Think about things like age, gender, social standing, profession. These are some basic questions that you can ask yourself, which can actually point you in quite a solid direction as to who you want to be your main character. So that's one way to approach it, is what does my story need? But as we know, sometimes the story is actually driven by the character. So sometimes you start with the character. So Sara, how do you approach this question?
I love that you said that, because that's exactly what I would have said. As soon as you stopped talking, I was going to be like, yes, but sometimes when it's character driven, not plot driven. And I think you're not wrong in that what you need to know about the shell of the outside of your character, their ethnicity and their socioeconomic status and those kinds of things are important almost every time, unless you're writing a sci-fi and they're all aliens. But even then, you describe the blue skin of the alien or something. But for me, I like to come at it where you're deciding who the character is from the inside. What was the inciting incident that affected them, so it is how they view humanity for the rest of their life. Everybody starts, nobody's living in a vacuum. Everybody is going to come to your story. Every character is coming to the story at a point in their life with trauma, drama, and experiences behind them that are going to drive how they react to the plot that you throw at them. And it almost always, if you create characters that way from the inside out, you're going to create drama without even trying. It's like putting people in an elevator, 6 people in an elevator who are all coming to that elevator from very different backgrounds. They're now stuck in an elevator. Well, now you've got a story, and you just from the characters existing. So it's kind of like, I think you can also build characters by like, who are these people and what has happened to them, and build them up that way too.
Absolutely. Yeah, like what drives your character? That's what defines them. You're absolutely right. And the reason I only mentioned the other things, these more external things, is because sometimes that can give you a clue as to what drives your character. You know,
Yeah, your
um,
socioeconomic status or things like that, like what you said, that's a perfect example of a way to use from the inside out, because those things affect their whole
yeah,
life experiences and how they feel about everything, or their
absolutely.
prejudices,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And another way to approach this, if you got an idea for your story, you got an idea for your character, and you maybe you're having trouble bringing this character to life. Okay, well, I know I need this kind of character. I need someone who, is strong in these ways, but has vulnerabilities in these ways, and this is what's driving them in the story. But I'm not quite seeing them. So, are there ways that you can sort of inject life into your character? Because remember, when you're first starting out, your character is probably pretty flat because you haven't had a chance to explore this character yet and bring them to life. So, how do you get started? What are some ways to sort of kickstart the process? And one suggestion I have is, as the author, just think, what interests you? Like, what do you get excited about? Like, who have you always admired? Say, you've always admired teachers, or you've always admired ambulance technicians. or you've always admired archaeologists. Like there's something, a profession or a kind of person you've always thought is really cool. Well, maybe your character could be one of those things. Maybe not, but it might get you thinking, like, what is it about teachers that I think is so cool? And you can start going through the process of what are some of the qualities that you see in a teacher that you think you'd like your character to have. And even if your character isn't actually a teacher, perhaps they have some of those qualities. So that can be a way to help you sort of kickstart the process by thinking about people that you admire.
Or people you don't like at all, which
Yeah,
can be,
absolutely.
I mean, that's that's something that I always have fun exploring. Like, the difficult people in your life, you can actually use some of those characteristics that you find to be a character flaw, and you can put them in your antagonist if you have an antagonist or something like that. But to make a really interesting main character, you can put some of those flaws, what you don't like, in your main character, because otherwise, they're too perfect. You know what I mean? So what is a character flaw in people that, or something that you've observed, like there's like someone has a weird habit of always smacking their mouth when they eat. Like, that's kind of a weird tick that you can use as you build out your character to make them more human and make them not, these Mary Sue characters.
Mhm.
Which, if people don't know, I mean, a Mary Sue is basically writing yourself as this perfect hero and inserting yourself in the story, and you're beautiful and perfect and can do no wrong and everything's wonderful. And it's a very obvious, like, I'm projecting myself into the story type of no you're not supposed to do. A lot of fan fiction is Mary Sue characters.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you know,
And you've definitely hit on a good point here, Sarah, that interesting characters have to have flaws. Certainly, as an editor, I've seen it where I read books that are otherwise quite good, but the character just never makes any mistakes. They always figure it out. They always make the right choice. It's because the author is sort of afraid to make their character look bad because they love this character. Well, you can still love a character if they have flaws. We as humans, we all have flaws, and people still love us. So,
well, one
um,
of the best books out there is Vanity Fair, and it's an old book. I'll give it that, but it's called, isn't it known? It's like known as like the book that has no heroes, because every single character is so majorly flawed, and their character arcs actually are like they start, they have a moment, and they end back kind of like where they started. So,
yeah,
like, it's like there's no heroes. It's
yeah.
and in a way, and yet that's like a famous book. It's been made
Mhm.
into movies with Reese Witherspoon, like, and it's over and over it's been made, and because the character study of these flawed characters, you can't look away, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And that's very true to humanity. None of us are perfect.
No.
So
In
character
my
creation should come with flaws.
my first novel was military sci-fi, and it was quite dark and gritty. And all of the characters, uh, at times, did questionable things. And I remember talking to one critic who said to me, "Yeah, all four of your main characters, they're all unlikable in their own way." And I was kind of like, "Thank you, that's really good. That's just what I was going for." Um, they've all, well, except for one, three of them have good qualities that you can admire. In fact, even the antagonist of the book can be admired for their sheer tenacity. Like, they know what they want and they are going to get it. So that could be admirable as well. Um, but yeah, definitely don't be afraid to have flaws. Now, getting back to like thinking about people that you know, I think you're absolutely right, Sarah. You can certainly look at people and use them as inspiration. But I caution our listeners, don't make a character exactly like a person that you know. Don't take your arch nemesis from work and make them a character who dies a painful, embarrassing death. I mean, okay, fine, if you want to, go ahead, but try to hide it, and try not to lift people directly, because sometimes people will actually figure it out, and you can get in trouble for that. Um, but if you can take an element of a person and say that's a really fascinating aspect to their personality, why do they do that? I'm going to try and explore why and try and figure out why they do that, particularly with antagonists. Um, a good antagonist is someone who is believable. They're evil, they're doing bad things, but they are believable. And the reader almost almost sympathizes with them because, like, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I wouldn't do what you're doing, but I can see why you did it. And that we can often get from real people if we interact with someone we really don't get along with. But if you can step back and think, but why? Why are they being such a jerk? Huh. You can come up with some really good ideas.
Well, the perfect example of that, and I'm just going to use it as like a literary example, is, and maybe a lot of people will know, is in the Marvel universe, Thanos.
Mm, mm-hmm.
He comes from tragedy and he has his why, and to him, his why makes sense. And it's for the greater good in his mind,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, and you can step back and go, I mean, I see his point and I see his trauma, but I really don't think that you, Thanos, gets to just arbitrarily like destroy half the life in the universe,
That's
right?
right.
Like, and so it's spoiler alert in case people haven't seen all the Avenger movies, but but I think that yes, every character, bad guy for sure, if you're writing a good antagonist, but every character should have their whys of why they react to certain things, why they believe humanity is a certain way, why they believe they have to behave a certain way. All these whys culminate in giving you a character that you've created that can have an arc within the book. Even
Mm-hmm.
if it's a plot driven book or if it's a character driven book, if they are complex enough, you automatically have enough meat to create an arc that is impactful for the reader and also believable on the page. And that's the goal for all your characters that are going to have page time, unless they're kind of frosting. And Ben, you've read my Flats Junction books. I have a spreadsheet of 200 some people who populate this town, because this town is not a ghost town, needs the people, but some of them are frosting. Now I know who they're married to and I know what country they're from. I know kind of, if they're good at baking pies, or everybody hates their buckets they build, and maybe they have, but they're frosting characters. But the characters that matter on the page that are going to be interacting, you should consider doing those deep dives on them, just so you can understand all of these things that we're giving you as how you can create a character. Use some of them, all of them, and build that character up, and then you won't be struggling later on to explain to an editor or a publisher why that character matters, or because that's usually, and I think you brought up the why, but I think in the end, like, we hear that all the time. Why this story? Why these characters? Why now? What is the why? And in the end, that's usually how you determine if this book is got legs or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there may be some folks listening who have characters in mind, and they may be thinking, look, I don't want to write a shades of gray book. I want to write just a black and white, good versus evil book, and that's totally okay. That's totally okay. But the reason why we emphasize the balance is that your antagonist, your villain, is already the bad guy. Like, just the way you've written your plot, the way you've structured it, they are already the bad guy. You don't need to work too hard to show why they're the bad guy. But to make the book more interesting, giving them some kind of reason for why they're the bad guy, just a little bit of sympathy or at least understanding towards them, will make them a more profound villain. Likewise, for your hero's already your hero. The story's about them, it follows them, they're making the good decisions, doing the right things. They don't have to work hard to be the hero. But to make them more interesting, to make them more likable, to make them more believable, it's good to give them flaws. And also, because your hero is driving the story, stories are driven by drama, and drama is often caused by mistakes. So your hero has to make the occasional mistake, right? And it could be that the reader will go, "Oh, I can't believe he did that." But that's part of the drama, that's part of the entertainment. And if you've given the hero a reasonable reason why he would make that mistake, then it's your reader's going with you, and they're going,
Yeah,
"Yes, oh, I can totally see why he did that. I hate that he did that. It was a
yeah,
stupid thing, but I'm
yeah,
so invested." Right? So
yeah.
it's why even if you're writing a straight black and white, no shades of gray kind of story, it's still worth the time to invest a little bit of effort to give both your hero and your villain a bit of depth.
Yep. Yep. And I think too that character creation is an art. And I think it's one of those buried arts inside our books that people don't realize that there's a lot of work that goes into the background of those types of processes, because I write like an 8-page sometimes thing on a character, and hardly any of it will make it in the book, but I know, you know, who and they are and where they come from and why they make the decisions they're going to be making. And so I think that, doing that kind of work is the unseen work in character creation that it really helps you as a writer. Um, and if you can, do that work, it helps you in the long run in writing, because character is still, even in a black and white book, where it's like cut and dry, good versus evil. Doing that back work is going to make the writing not only flow easier for you, you're going to have answers to questions as they come along, but you're going to have a more complex book just because you've done kind of your research on your fake characters.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, Sarah, the reader may not actually be consciously aware of all these things that you've done. Like it's all in the background. The reader won't know why they're so drawn to this character, but they are. And it's
Right.
because of all this work you've done in the background. And you're right, you don't want to serve it up with a shovel. You want to make it subtle. You want to weave it in. You want to set up like critical decisions that the hero is going to make. If they're going to make a critical decision wrong, then you should set it up beforehand why they're going to make that decision wrong.
Right.
Maybe there's misinformation or they have some emotional blindness or whatever it is, right? You
Yeah.
build that in. And so when it happens, the reader doesn't agree with the decision, but they understand why it happened. And on we go. And now the hero has the problem of trying to fix, this disaster that they've made because of their bad decision. So,
Yeah. I think that's the greatest compliment I've ever actually gotten on a character I've written is I've had people come back to me and go, I don't like this one character, or I don't agree with this character's decision making at all. And I'm like, good, but how many people in your life do you have that you disagree with their points of view, their reasons for doing something? You think that that's a bad choice and you wouldn't do it if it were you. The books are populated with people like that. That's the point. I tried to make that character like that. When it happened, I was like, yes, it worked.
yeah. And if I can offer a compliment to you, Sarah, your books are written from multiple points of view.
Mm,
Each chapter will switch to a different point of view
some of them,
character.
yeah.
And those characters are very often in opposition to each other. So it's almost like there isn't an antagonist, or we're not sure who the antagonist is, because all the characters are sympathetic because you get into their mind and we see where they're coming from. We don't always like their decisions, but we can see where they're coming from, and we can see it from their point of view, and then we can see it from the other character's point of view, and it's really cool.
Thank you.
It's really
Yeah,
cool.
it's really fun to write like that because you do get to play with different voices.
Yeah,
But I definitely didn't dive in that way. I mean, for my first couple books were all from one point of view just to stick that way.
yeah,
But I think and I think like that's the fun of writing books that have several characters in them, because not even just multiple points of view, but you the characters, whether or not you're doing a simple good versus evil book, those characters, if you build them right, if you create them with enough layers, they will provide a lot of drama and can sometimes carry you through plot parts that are a
hmm
little wobbly. But if the characters are strong enough, you can pull, as long as there's not too much wobbly sagginess, you can pull people over those soft points in your plot and get to the next scene because the characters are just interesting on the page.
yeah,
So I think like, and I working in film, and you hear about, so many producers are looking for, they want thrillers, they want action packed stuff. And really what they're saying is, we just want you to like throw in stick figures
hmm
and just come up with a lot of ways to like shock and awe and explode and have, crazy things happen and a shark out of the water. Like they just want plot. They don't want character. And the characters are, for that reason, very superficial. And the ones that can do both, that's the magic sauce. And I
yeah,
will reference the DC comics, and the characters are kind of superficial, but they give you just enough extra emotional depth and complexity that's why it's so good, because it's the
yeah.
action, and then the characters not as superficial as most, and that's the sweet spot.
Agreed. I think the Marvel movies are a great example of that. You
Star
know,
Wars too, as you know.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, Iron Man, he's kind of a jerk, but you still kind of cheer for him, and it's really well done.
Yeah.
So there's a great example of almost the anti-hero in someone like Iron
Mhm.
Man. Then you
Mhm.
get someone like Captain America, who could be a complete caricature, but the way he's written and the way he's acted, it gives him nuance and depth, which actually
And he
came across
makes
well.
some mistakes sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So
but you see the goodness of his heart, and blah blah blah. On we go. But example. So for a really quick look at characters, look at the Marvel movies up to Endgame. After that, don't worry about it. But up to Endgame,
I
great
would
movie.
agree. Endgame was, yeah, it's kind of you're good after that.
Cool. Okay, now we've done our plug for Marvel. Um,
They'll pay us later when our podcast is super famous. Then we'll get
that's right.
back pay, right? Um, and I was gonna say one book I mentioned to you. I
Mhm.
wanted to just mention one book if people want to kind of expand into what we've talked about today and like in an actual book, then I would highly recommend Story Genius by Lisa Crone. I we can put that in the description, but Story Genius by Lisa Crone, Cron is her last name. It's the only book out there, I think, called Story Genius. But it's a really quick read, but it's a really nice way to expand on what Ben and I have talked about today. And I cannot recommend it enough. It's just very well done and a very helpful, like, writing tool. If you're going to have multiple writing Bibles to help you write, that one I would recommend being on the pile.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Sarah.
So otherwise, that's our show for today, everyone. Please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any chats and tips and tricks like this. Feel free to leave a review because it helps us a ton. And if anyone is looking to get their book ready or to check if their characters are developed enough, we definitely always recommend our friends at Cascadia Author Services, and you can find them at cascadiaauthorservices.com. And you can find Ben at bennettrcoles.com as well as on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can catch up with Sarah at sarahdahlman.com and on Instagram. Thanks for joining us today. Please reach out if there are any topics you'd like us to cover, and we'll see you again when we next chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sara.